Hi, this is Naji, and my project for Hackathon34 has been to inspect LLMs and how they could help us improve our process to map raw content we receive from our content providers, such as editorial content providers, social, Twitter, Reddit, broadcast content provider, etc., and how to map it into our internal schema, internal meltwater schema that powers our MI app. Now, what is content mapping? We have on the left side a raw content document we receive from provider, and on the right side the map content, our target outcome. So there are some relevant information on the raw content that we want to copy over, like the title, like the body. In some cases, we want to extract the value, but not just copy it over, like in this case, the date. We also want to transform it from this human readable format on the left to milliseconds on the right, because that's what our internal schema enforces, right? And then there are other blocks like source information, some metadata, outer metadata, engagement metrics that we also want to map. This is a very simplified example. Now, this process is currently very manual. It means that there is a user that goes to a UI and they will have to inspect the raw JSON line by line and try to spot the relevant information that we want to copy into the internal schema. And then that requires them also to have a very good understanding of the internal schema, how it is structured, what the fields mean, what format they are expected to be stored in, and how they actually behave in the app, right? Like how they are represented in the MI app, or reflected in the MI app. Since this is a manual process, then there is room for errors to happen, and we might end up with inconsistent mappings across 115 providers plus providers mappings. So, but after all, like in general, the overall mapping procedure, content mapping procedure is complex and takes time. So it might take days to only work on the mapping part, depending on how complex the content we're receiving from the provider. So I'm not gonna dive a lot into the slide deck because it's uploaded. But basically, we are like time to market is slow. It takes us time to onboard the new providers. It also uh, we very often focus on what content we is relevant for us and we already support and we want to have, but we receive a lot more, and that content might also be relevant. We don't have that visibility. So I thought maybe there is an opportunity here to also surface the non-used fields. And of course, this is an expensive process because it's manual and it involves engineers and non-engineers. Yeah. So let's go into our current app. This is how it looks like. It's very basic. You basically go in there. You want to add a new content provider that we've signed with. We create some content and we start from scratch. We give it a name and we start typing really like line by line, what is the input and what is the output it should have. And then look at the JSON, inspect it line by line, and write the mapping logic for it. And then it will basically look like this. Later, let's take, for example, New York Times. You have some mapping where you know, like, okay, my title you can find on the raw document under title. It's pretty straightforward. In some cases, there are conditions. In some cases, there is transformation logic. This is, well, New York Times and RSS feed. This is a simple example, but there are much more complex mappings. So let's go to the hackathon project. what did I do? I just introduced a third button here called mapping suggest. So let's look at it, what it does while it is doing it, and then we can talk about it. So I'm going to paste some content from New York Times, editorial content. And by hitting suggest mappings, it's basically detecting the content type. It was quick. It figures out this is a news. It's not social. It's not a broadcast. This is actually news. So why is that important? Because the LLM will narrow down the scope to really only editorial schema, and it will disregard any fields that might only associate with the broadcast or social schemas. So this makes it quicker and it, more accurate and more precise. After it does that, it starts generating the fields. So it goes through the fields and try to find the associated field in the raw documents. This is also a little bit slow at the moment, but that's because the prompt or the LLM is given a lot of instructions and rules to make no failure, to be precise, to be accurate in what it receives, how it interprets it, and how it returns it. So what do we see? We see that it has identified this is a news document. It has identified the fields on the raw content and to what fields they map in the meltwater path. It suggests some transformations because it knows that this date in the meltwater system need to be in milliseconds, but it's not what we're receiving on the raw data. And then it gives also some confidence about the mapping that it is suggesting and the possibility to disregard it, to the user to disregard a field if they think it's not relevant or is wrong. It also gives us the unmapped input fields. So the ones that we have on the raw content, but we didn't map. This is important because maybe the LLM would do mistakes, and then some of these fields need to be mapped. But also it's important because this is content we're receiving and we're not probably not making use of. And it's reasonable content to store, to surface to product, see what potential improvements it can introduce to our users, to our services, what value it can introduce to our users. So, and then by hitting generate IDML, what it will do is it will create a very basic IDML mapping of the um, field-to-field mappings that it suggested that users can copy or download and take it into a different view like the create new or playground, and then start from there, right? So for the sake of the hackathon, I just left this mapping suggestion out of the other flows, but it could be incorporated into, the create new or the pipeline playground where it, makes more sense to be. I will just to throw in some other content type, um, social document, then run it again. It will detect that this is social, did that, and then it's generating mapping um, for each field on the document. Now, the document I pasted is from Reddit. It's a little bit bigger than the other one, so it takes more time, but in general, the social documents or the social schema is more complex than the editorial, and that's why it will take it a little bit more time to generate the suggestions. Um, yeah, so while it is generating that, I can maybe highlight the value that we see here. Basically, uh, it will improve our time to produce mappings, right? Reduce it from days probably to hours or even minutes later. It improves our accuracy and coverage of the content. It empowers our non-engineers to create mappings, and then our engineers could focus on other tasks and other enablements. It also make it visible what fields we are not mapping, and but after all, it creates a solid foundation to future automations that we want to do. Yeah, so basically here, the same thing. You can find the fields on the raw document, how they are mapped to the internal fields, some more suggestions of how content can be transformed, the unmapped fields by generating the IDML. I can have a basic IDML that I can copy over and use. Now, for future enhancement, I can imagine that we will we would want to have full support of IDML, like a smarter support of IDML, generating actual IDML code. Currently, it's really just basic, but we have plenty of stored IDMLs, so maybe it can extract patterns from those to suggest, to fine-tune the mapping model, make it more accurate, deterministic. Um, and another thing could be like it will have a smarter transformation, like auto suggesting transformations, like formatting, maybe how content could be split or parsed or combined. That's also something can be trained to do to support or to enable complex mappings. Um, and of course to enforce like schema rules so that it prevents potential regression or invalid mappings that could occur throughout the process. um, so yeah, that was my hackathon project. Thanks for listening, and sorry for the long video. Bye bye.